Welcome back, everybody, to What Do You Know with Nick and Devin. I am Devin.
And I'm Nick.
There we go. There's the punch.
Yeah.
Today's episode, I'm going to kind of get right into it. It's not a fun one.
I just want to slate that.
I'm just going to bury the lead right there. Say it's not going to be super fun and exciting. It's a little sad.
Oh, God. What a downer.
And so we might be able to laugh along the way, but I'm not sure.
Through uncomfortability, we will laugh.
Exactly.
Oh, okay,
exactly.
good.
We're going to use comedy to mask our real feelings, just like I do in everyday life.
Trauma. Perfect.
So I'm actually going to ask you right off the bat, what do you know about the Trail of Tears?
Oh, my God.
Yeah, I told you.
You're diving right in.
Yeah.
You know what? I don't want to say topical,
Uh-huh.
but isn't November Native American History Month?
It is, which is why I'm bringing this up.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. I feel like I know, but not enough.
Uh-huh.
Like I know that it is like a very traumatizing and incredibly just sad part of history with the colonization of the U.S.
Uh-huh.
And that's kind of it. And like moving people out of their land.
Yeah.
And dying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the general points.
Totally.
There are a lot of specifics.
Yeah.
And I know that I don't touch on all of them.
Okay.
Because like I said, there are a lot of details that we could talk about for hours and hours.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to squish it all into about an hour. We'll
And
see.
this is Devin's 4-part series.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get your tissues ready.
I mean, actually, though.
Yeah.
I also want to put out there that I am a white man. While if I do a DNA test, it might come back with some Blackfoot Nation blood in me. Mm-hmm. It's not certainly enough to claim anything, get any scholarship money, all that fun stuff. But I'm going to do my best to represent these Native people in telling this tragic story. Mm-hmm. And if I mispronounce any names, so sorry. But I'm just going to relay this story as best as I can as a white person telling the story.
I think it's I think when it comes to things like, very intense historical events, or even like when I'm listening to like true crime podcasts, a lot of people talk about how, yes, this is a horrifying event or crime or whatever it might be that happened, but to continue the story is the important thing. And like having people actually know what happened is like the more prominent aspect. So I'm glad that like we're bringing this up, and it's not in a sense of like, how do I claim the attention of this? It's more so, how do I like make sure people know the true history of what this was.
Definitely.
Can I ask a question really quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if you have it in your notes. I know we say like American Indian
Mm-hmm.
or Native American.
Mm-hmm.
First Nation, is that like the more prominent verbiage now, or is like all of them acceptable? Do you know?
I believe we're going more towards First Nation as time goes on.
Got it.
I mean, I still hear some folks say like Indian.
Sure.
Native folks calling themselves Indians, you know. But Native American, First Nation, First American, it's all just kind of, as far as I know, personal preference, as long as you're not saying anything with like ill intent.
Sure.
Or using any of the old slurs.
Sure.
Although some people would say like calling someone an Indian is a slur.
Yeah.
Because it's not who they are.
Right. Well, it's crazy. In government, they're referred to as like AIAN, American Indian, Alaskan Native.
Right.
And I was like, why did we go with Alaskan Native, but we went with American Indian?
Yeah. What's the difference?
Right. You could have went with NAAN. Anyway.
Right.
Whatever. Anyway. That's all I had to ask.
No, you're definitely, that's something that's really important. And like, if you're on the side of TikTok, native TikTok, which is a great place, there's a lot of funny people there. They have a lot of discussions about what are we calling like what you should call ourselves, like what's okay for you to refer to us as.
Okay.
And a lot of education goes on that side of TikTok, which is really cool.
That's great.
So without anything else to say, let's get into the horrifying tragedy story of the Trail of Tears.
Let's do it.
So this event was one of several that took place over about a span of 20 years, from 1830 to 1850. This was all part of an ethnic cleansing and forced displacement of what was referred to as the 5 civilized tribes by the U.S. government.
Okay.
These tribes were the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Muskogee, which, and I don't know if they themselves refer to themselves as the Creeks.
Okay.
But Muskogee Creek is part of the same nation.
Okay.
And then also the Seminole. By the end of this whole ordeal, this whole 20 years, at least 60,000 natives were displaced, and anywhere from 13,000 to 17,000 died.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I told you it's not a fun topic.
Yeah.
We're gonna get through it though. So who to blame? A lot of people.
Yeah.
The list is long and lengthy.
The scroll goes on.
Previously, George Washington and one Henry Knox, which was one of the founding fathers, proposed a cultural transformation for the natives to live a more quote-unquote white American way of life.
Okay.
There's also a lot of air quotes and quote-unquotes.
Okay.
I'm just going to probably brush over that.
Okay.
Just because of, like, even the 5 civilized tribes, like,
right.
quote-unquote 5 civilized,
right.
You know. So
there's a lot of racism kind of like thrown within.
Yeah, and I don't mean any of it.
No. I think we understand that. Like from a historical context, like of course these white men were, you know, if you were not white, you were lesser than, right. And like how do we bring you to a civilized fashion?
Right. If you don't live in a brick house,
right,
then you are not civilized,
right.
Kind of thing. So these like I said, George Washington, Henry Knox, and others were like, hey, be white, live a more white American life.
Yeah.
And some of the members of these different nations, especially in the Cherokee and Choctaw, took to this idea of assimilation as a means of survival.
Okay.
Hence why we called them the 5 civilized tribes, because they kind of took some of these things that the U.S. government was forcing upon them. You're like, okay, we'll do this just so we can continue living our lives.
Right. Assimilation by survival.
Yeah.
Got it.
And then we jump to President Andrew Jackson, who is a big name for this, who did a lot of terrible things to the natives.
Yeah.
And the natives actually nicknamed him Sharp Knife because of all the cruel things and like backstabbing and like all that fun stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So Jackson was the one to pass the Indian Removal Act of 1830, despite it being opposed by some members of Congress, including Davy Crockett of Tennessee.
Oh, okay. I didn't know he was a member of Congress.
Neither did I.
Surprise. There's actually a, speaking of Andrew Jackson, there is a like punk musical. Came out like a little bit, I think, after Spring Awakening, so like early 2000s-ish, called Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson.
Oh.
And it like some focus around this as well.
Yeah.
It's actually a really interesting take, but that just kind of reminded me of that. Yeah.
No, definitely. There's a punk band from the early 2000s called called Andrew Jackson's Jihad.
Oh my God.
HHA is what they shortened it to.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right.
Not relevant. So Andrew Jackson passed the Indian Removal Act of 1830. And even though he wasn't the sole author or proprietor of this act, it had a great influence in its passing.
Yeah.
Indian removal was one of Jackson's top legislative priorities.
Jesus.
During his military career, he was a general. He led many campaigns against the Muskogees, or the Creek, and Seminoles to drive the natives out and give the hundreds of thousands of acres of conquered land to the white farmers and settlers. So he's always had a goal in mind to get rid of everyone else to further expand American territory,
That's
U.S.
insane.
territory.
Yeah. Was he the carver of Manifest Destiny, or was that post him?
Yes,
Ish.
it
Okay.
spans between. I don't know if it was necessarily anyone before him,
Okay.
but like definitely him and his the president after him, Van Buren, were really gun ho about getting rid of everyone.
Well, and like Louisiana Purchase and just expanding the U.S.
Yeah, the
through that,
Louisiana Purchase was. I have it in my notes, but it was like right before all of this happens.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So we have that land. The U.S. has that land.
Yeah.
So we have the Indian Removal Act of 1830 signed into law by Jackson on May 28th, 1830.
Okay.
And the act, quote, is an act to provide for an exchange of lands with the Indians residing in any of the states or territories and for the removal west of the river Mississippi, end quote. So this was supported by Jackson and all the southern and white settlers and several state governments in that area as well, especially Georgia. With the invention of the cotton gin recently happening, which caused rapid development in the cotton farming industry. There was an expansion of slavery, and then also there was a discovery of gold near a river in Georgia, resulting in the Georgia Gold Rush in 1828.
Did not know that Georgia had a gold rush.
I didn't know either.
I really
always thought
thought
it was just out west,
solely
like California.
west. Yeah.
We had one in Georgia,
Oh
supposedly.
my God.
So this act gave power to the president to do the following. Exchange land with native nations and provide infrastructure improvements on the existing lands.
Okay.
The natives would be given land west of the Mississippi in the Indian colonization zone. Terrible name.
Jesus.
That the U.S. acquired as part of the Louisiana Purchase,
Okay.
which happened in 1803, so 27 years prior. And the land given to those natives was mostly in what we call modern-day Oklahoma.
Okay.
The government would pay for transportation west should the nations willingly relocate. And then it did not allow to force the nations to forcibly remove the nations west without a mutually agreed upon treaty.
Okay.
So the irony, though, here, it's not really ironic, is that the United States, during Jackson's presidency alone, made 86 treaties with 26 different native nations between New York and Mississippi.
86 treaties with only 26 tribes?
Yeah.
What?
And all of those treaties forced the surrender of land, rights, and removal from their land. So
Okay.
they were written, broken by the U.S. government,
Right.
rewritten, broken, rewritten, and so on.
Jesus Christ.
86 times.
Why didn't you just put it in the first one? I just don't. Wild.
It's fucked.
To get what you want. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now we actually get to the Trail of Tears.
Okay.
Now that the Indian Removal Act is in place, we're kicking everybody out. So we're going to go through the 5 civilized tribes
Okay.
and break down what happened to each of them.
Are the treaties included within the time frame of the Trail of Tears, or do the treaties happen and then the Trail of Tears starts?
Yes.
Got it.
Treaties happen before, during, and after.
Got it. Okay.
I'm not going through all 86 treaties.
Buckle up, folks. Number 1.
And I'm going through all the parts, all the legal jargon.
Yeah.
In the Old English of
Yeah.
the colonization era. No, there is one treaty I touch on during this part, but I'm not going through all of the treaties that happened.
Okay.
So we're going to start off with the Choctaw, who resided in Alabama and Mississippi.
Okay.
And I'm listing off states for us modern people to know where they were about.
Yeah.
But their land obviously crossed our modern day borders and whatnot. So
Right.
some of the other nations, they spanned like several states over. So I'm going to be listing all of those. But to them, it was just, hey, this is all of our land.
Got it.
Anyway. So the Choctaw, Alabama and Mississippi, they were the first nation to be removed as part of the Indian Removal Act. And much to many people's surprise, including Jackson, they were much more cooperative than what everyone predicted.
Okay.
So one of the leaders of the Choctaw Nation, George W. Harkins, wrote a letter to the people of the U.S. right before the Choctaw were removed. And part of it is quoted saying, "We as Choctaws rather chose to suffer and be free than live under the degrading influence of laws which our voice could not be heard in their formation." And the beginning of that letter says, like, to the U.S. people, is like, hey, I'm writing this to you even though I know you're not going to listen to me because I'm a Choctaw.
Right.
But here we go. I'd rather not live under your rule and suffer in my travel and finding a new way of life.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Yeah.
I told you
That's so fucked.
Debbie
Yeah.
Downer episode.
I mean, but there's so much pride and honor in that to say, like,
yeah,
we're not gonna do this, right? Like, why try to fight and like lose so many people versus fine, we're just gonna, yeah.
Here we go. This is only beginning. The Choctaw were to be removed in 3 phases, starting in November 1831 and then ending in 1833. That was the plan. But due to horrid and unpredictable winter weather, caused massive delays and casualties during the removal process.
Okay.
For some, I mean, like, I know I can assume the reason, but for some reason, like, the government was like, yeah, you're moving during the winter.
Of course.
Right.
Right.
So freezing temperatures caused rivers to freeze for weeks, preventing them from being able to cross said rivers and being locked down into one spot. Food rationing went down to a handful of boiled corn, 1 turnip, and 2 cups of heated water per day.
Oh my God.
And throughout all of this, 17,000 Choctaws traveled the Trail of Tears, and about 2,500 to 6,000 died along the way.
Jesus. My question, though, is like the whole ration I feel like if I was a Choctaw, like, I'd just be like, we're just doing it on our own. Like, leave us. You know what I mean?
Well, that was part of it, was that they were supposed to receive aid from the U.S. government to help them move. But because of all these delays and the U.S. government not giving a fuck, they were like, well, here you go. Good luck. Get out of here.
Wild.
We have our guns pointed at you.
Right.
Get out.
Yeah. At that point, I'd just be like, at a certain point, I feel like you just realize that the aid that is supposed to be coming, like, truly isn't.
Yeah.
And I'd just be like, all right, fuck it. You know what? Keep your shit. Like, we're just gonna find new.
Do our best.
Right.
Yeah. A French philosopher, Alexis de Tocqueville, it's been a while since I took a French class, witnessed the Choctaw removals in 1831 and later wrote about what he saw. Quote, "In the whole scene there was an air of ruin and destruction, something which betrayed a final and irrevocable adieu. One couldn't watch without feeling one's heart wrung. The Indians were tranquil but somber and taciturn. There was one who could speak English, and of whom I asked why the Choctaws were leaving their country. To be free, he answered. Could never get any other reason out of him. We watched the expulsion of one of the most celebrated and ancient American peoples."
Yeah. Just for land.
Just for land. Just for cotton.
Right. Wild.
So that's the Choctaws. Now we're on to the Seminole.
Okay.
And they were in Florida. They had pretty much the whole state of Florida. And they were actually promised land on the Muskogee Reservation and become part of that nation. The problem is with that is that some of the Seminole were actually derived from Muskogee groups and other native nations. So the Seminole were kind of, some of them at least, were kind of like a melting pot of other nations, nations coming together.
Got it.
Either people that had left their former or just kind of all blended in together.
Got it.
But the Muskogee, the original Muskogee that left to live in modern Florida to be a part of the Seminole Nation were considered deserters and felt that only death awaited them if they had returned. Because some of the Muskogee were like, if you come back here, you're a traitor, you're a deserter.
Right.
We're just going to kill you.
Right. Yeah, that's terrifying.
Yeah, so like, what the fuck are you supposed to do?
Right.
So this is what the Seminole decided to do, and they decided to be against removal and resist the U.S. government and fight back.
All right.
So the War Department, the U.S. War Department, loaned local militia 500 muskets, and 500 volunteers were then mobilized to combat the native resistance.
Okay.
The native war parties that were assembled did as much as they could to regain their own territory from the U.S. government, which included raiding farms, settlements, capturing militia supply trains, and ambushing U.S. Army companies along while they're marching to wherever.
Yeah.
And this war between the Seminole and the U.S. government actually lasted 10 years.
Oh my God.
Which is crazy.
That's nuts.
The U.S. government was estimated to have spent about $20 million, which in today is approximately $606.5 million.
To fight off the Seminole people?
For 10 years.
Jesus.
Yeah. Crazy.
Does that battle or war have a title?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. It's not a prominent feature in what is American, like, educational history.
No, none of this is.
Yeah. Well, yes.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if it was, because like a 10-year war is
huge.
Huge, right. Yeah.
I think, at least if I remember correctly, in most U.S. history textbooks, it's just kind of glossed over in the whole Manifest Destiny. We pushed everyone out. Trail of Tears happened, and it's just like
next
a
chapter.
paragraph.
Yeah. Okay.
Because even like some sources that I was finding here, it was all just kind of like, this paragraph happened, and then this paragraph happened, and it was like, oh, you're just glossing over this 10-year war that happened, this whole other thing that happened. Like, we're not gonna dive into it, and like, no.
Okay, great.
Right, and like, I can't imagine Florida having anything in their textbooks about this now.
What do you mean? They're so expansive and elaborative.
Yeah. Florida's always been a state since the beginning of time. Adam and Eve were in Florida.
That is where the Garden of Eden is.
Orlando, Florida.
Brought to you by Disney.
Yeah. So yeah, we had this 10-year war between the Seminole and the U.S. government. U.S. government spent a shit ton of money, and most of the Seminole were still, unfortunately, forcibly exiled to the Muskogee Territory, west of the Mississippi, while others actually retreated into the Everglades.
Oh, okay.
And eventually, the U.S. government gave up trying to capture and fight off the Seminole in the Everglades because it was just too difficult.
Yeah, all swampland.
Right, and wound up leaving about 500 or so Seminole alone in the Everglades.
Okay. Is there a population in that area today?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah. And this band of Seminole is actually the only federally recognized nation, as far as I know, that never relinquished sovereignty or signed a peace treaty with the U.S. government.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, so they still got some chutzpah down there.
They're like, I can do whatever the fuck I want to do.
Right.
Get out of here. That's amazing.
Yeah, and like, as with most modern reservations, I know there was a thing with Oklahoma a couple years ago most, if not all, reservations are all locally governed. Like only the
Right.
federal government can get involved. Otherwise, the state government can't do anything.
Can't do shit.
Right.
Yeah. Which is great.
Good.
Kind of. Right. We get it.
You find your little lights.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That thin silver line.
Yeah. So that is the Seminole, and we're going to move on to the Muskogee. So the Muskogee, their land was stretched from southern Tennessee to Alabama, western Georgia, and parts of northern Florida.
Okay.
That's where you kind of get that divide from the Muskogee and the Seminole.
Got it.
That part of Florida. So with the Muskogee and the U.S. government, there was just so many broken treaties that tensions, of course, began to rise.
Were the Muskogee a pretty large population of people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
of the five, like them and the Cherokee are, I'd say, probably
The largest.
the largest.
Okay.
But that's my guess.
Okay.
So all these broken treaties caused tensions to rise between the two. And the Muskogee pleaded with President Jackson for protection from state governments encroaching on their territory. But of course, none came from the federal government.
Right.
The states were kept on just illegally occupying native territory and being like, all right, here you go. We're just going to give you this parcel of land to this white farmer. You might come across some resistance, but just stay put. You're good to go. And the Muskogee were like, the fuck?
What the fuck? Yeah.
Right. Here
Just
we are.
encroaching like acre by acre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just little baby steps. So on March 24th, 1832, the Treaty of Casita was signed that divided up the Muskogee lands into individual allotments. And when I said that I was going to talk about one treaty, I meant I'm going to talk about two treaties. I forgot about the Treaty of Casita.
We have now expanded.
So we have 1832 Treaty of Casita.
Okay.
Divides up the Muskogee lands into individual allotments. So they could either sell their land to fund their move out west,
Okay.
get out of here, or stay and submit to Alabama state law.
I think this is like, as I'm hearing this more and more, it's like, it's just crazy that it's like, hey, I'm going to come in and I've already like reorganized your entire land.
Yeah.
And like made it into lots. And so now your only decisions are you can get the fuck out or you can assimilate to American culture. But like out of nowhere, like just imagine someone like walking into your home right now and being like, so you can either live only in the kitchen or you can leave the house.
Right.
Like pick one.
Or go across the town.
Right. And you're just like, this is what are you talking about? Like, nope, that's it.
No,
That's
this piece of paper.
Right.
That I have right here, signed by people you don't know.
And if you don't, you die.
Right.
So pick one.
Yeah.
That's just
That's manifest destiny, baby.
Jesus.
Fucked up.
Yeah. No, totally.
Oh, God. All right. Anyway, I get mad at this.
Yeah. Rightfully so.
I'm so upset.
Yeah.
And so, stay or submit to Alabama state law. So, like I said, illegal settlement by white farmers kept on happening.
Yeah.
And even schemes developed by various state government officials cheated the Muskogee out of their allotments that they were assigned. And none of these actions, these illegal actions, were stopped by the federal or state government, which prevented the Muskogee from even attempting to comply with this Treaty of Casita. So they were like, what the fuck are we supposed to do?
Right.
You're not giving us a chance. So frustrated, abused, running low on supplies, some of the Muskogee were like, fuck this, we're going to fight back, retaliate.
Yeah.
And some of them raided farms and did other acts of violence towards the white settlers. And it eventually led to an all-out war with the U.S. government in 1836.
Okay.
Was it an actual war? No.
No.
It was called a war by the U.S. government in order to claim that the Muskogee forfeited their rights to the previously signed treaty.
Oh, bullshit.
Yep.
So a way to get around the treaty was to declare it a war.
Yeah. And so these small raids. I mean, violence is never great.
Sure.
Killing people is never great, but to escalate these small acts of violence that the Muskogee were doing, that I'm sure the white settlers were also doing to the natives, the government was like, this is an act of war. We're at war. This treaty, rip it up, forfeit. So this gave the U.S. the right, quote unquote, right, to forcibly remove the Muskogee at this time from that land and send them out west.
Just by declaring a war.
Yeah.
Jesus.
By saying they forfeited the treaty.
Right. Because they're like, well, I'm only just like moving this little bit of land. You're the one causing the violence.
Right.
So now we have to retaliate. And
it's like I'm not touching you.
Right.
I'm not touching you.
Right.
And then your brother just like decks you in the face.
You're like, Mom.
Exactly. Yeah. But at a way worse scale.
No, I'm pretty sure it's about the same level. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Than a road trip to the state.
Right. Right.
So 15,000 Muskogee were removed from their land to resettle in modern Oklahoma.
Okay. Did everyone just get pushed to Oklahoma?
That's where Indian Territory
was determined.
Indian Territory, was determined to be, because that was part of the Louisiana Purchase. And so they're like, great, we have a place to shove off all these people.
Sure, just west of the Mississippi.
Just west of the Mississippi, until eventually white people wanted to go west of the Mississippi.
Right.
So 15,000 were removed from their land. 3,500 did not make it.
I mean, that's rough travel.
It's very rough. I go into a little bit when I talk about the Cherokee.
Okay.
And I did a little bit about with the Choctaw. But what they had to go through during their travel is why it's called the Trail of Tears, because people are horribly saddened about having to leave their ancient sacred homelands. But on top of that as well, I'll go into it a little bit later, but the amount of disease and the horrible lengths of travel that they had to go through, 1,200 miles or so. Some of them had to travel all by foot.
Yeah. Well, and you're moving
through winter.
Well, through winter and different landscapes and terrains. You're going from these wooded, lush. You have plants and animals, and you settled in a really great area, right? And now we're we're gonna put you in Oklahoma, and just kind of there's.
Right. You're going from
bison?
the foothills of the Appalachian to these plains that your people aren't familiar with. You have several nations of plains natives, plains Indians out there that are familiar with this land, that's made their civilization there.
Right.
But now what the fuck are you supposed to do?
Right. Well, and I think it's one thing when we think so many people had died along the way because the travel was so rough, but it's you don't think about once you get there, having to completely reacclimate yourself and rebuild to a completely different area.
Right.
Because we have so many different types of terrain within the US.
Well, and then think about too, the folks that were in Florida used to the Florida weather.
Yeah.
Now having to travel through the winters of even southern Illinois going into Oklahoma, where you actually have all of this snow and harsh weather that you're not acclimated to.
You don't know how to prepare for that. You don't know how to actually keep skin and use that as and blubber. Well, not blubber, but you know what I mean.
That's a little further north.
The whales of the Lake Michigan?
Whales, yeah. The whales that swim in the fields of Oklahoma.
Right.
There we go. We found our humor. All right. So we're going to talk about the Chickasaw. And this is actually my shortest group to talk about.
Okay.
And they had lived in northern Mississippi, northwestern and northern Alabama, western Tennessee, and southwestern Kentucky.
Oh, okay.
So that kind of area. The Chickasaw had actually made a deal to receive $3 million in compensation from the U.S. for their lands.
Oh.
The fun part is...
we never paid it.
They were not paid for nearly 30 years.
Jesus. And then eventually paid?
Ish.
I was I hope with inflation calculated.
No, of course not. They started to receive payments 30 years after this deal was made.
payments. We have to put you on a layaway plan. Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah. So in 1836, the Chickasaw purchased land from the Choctaws.
Okay.
They paid $530,000, which is approximately $14.1 million today,
Jesus.
to the Choctaws for the westernmost part of their land. And this was after like 5 years of back and forth debate going on.
Okay. This is one tribe purchasing land from the other tribe?
Correct.
Okay.
Also, we're going to use the word nation.
Sorry.
No, you're okay.
Okay.
I didn't explain this at the beginning, and I wanted to. That tribe and chief are what I've learned, and I might be wrong.
Okay.
But what I've learned from listening to other natives talk is that both of those words were white man words for these people.
Got it.
They're like, oh, this is just a tribe of uncivilized people.
Sure.
You know,
Okay.
that kind of like British professor bullshit.
Got it.
So we call them nations
Heard.
and leaders.
Got it.
Because chief is not a great term.
Got it.
As far as I know. Little
No,
more
thank
education.
you. Yeah.
No, obviously you didn't know.
No, but that's what
this
we're
is.
an educational podcast. Have you heard? With
Wow.
some humor.
Not this episode.
No.
So eventually, once they crossed the Mississippi and entered Indian Territory, what was on the map, the Chickasaws actually merged with the Choctaw Nation.
Okay.
I don't know if that was by choice, because part of my research was that the U.S. government just kind of merged them together and I think it might have just been for ease of paperwork.
Okay. Okay.
Which is like really awful, because then later on in the 20th century, the Chickasaw actually reestablished their own independent government and are now federally recognized as the Chickasaw Nation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I'm not too sure.
Sure.
I couldn't find out too much.
Sure.
But here we are.
I'm sure there's a lot of complexity within how that happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the Chickasaw, despite having these kind of monetary things happen for them to attempt to make their move easier,
Yeah.
over 500 Chickasaw still wound up dying from dysentery and smallpox and other things on their journey west.
Got it. Okay.
And funnily enough, this isn't funny at all.
Oh, I was like,
The Chickasaw would actually later join the Confederacy in the Civil War.
Interesting.
And the Cato, I'm not too sure how to pronounce this nation, so I'm going to do my best. Catawba,
Okay.
Cherokee, Choctaw, and most of the Seminole, as well as some other nations, all wound up joining the Confederacy during the Civil War.
And fighting with the Confederacy?
Correct. And it was
Interesting.
all because the Confederacy wound up promising like funds
That's what I figured.
to
Okay.
these nations, and then hopefully eventually, if the Confederacy won, would fully recognize these nations as sovereign and independent states.
Yeah.
But also, a lot of these nations, a lot of the native nations had slaves of their own.
Oh, okay.
Both of other native folk as well as African slaves.
Got it.
And I don't know if that was a deciding factor for them to join the Confederacy.
Sure.
Because like the Union would be like, hey, you have to get rid of your slaves
Right.
either way. And so these native nations were like, nah, we're
We're
also
good.
getting promised to be recognized as our own sovereign state.
Yeah.
We're going to fight with the Confederacy. Also, I fucking hate the U.S. government.
Yeah. No, that's
so,
fair.
like, I get it.
There's a lot of like ideologies of the time that made sense and like kind of like warped themselves into this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like you have these like, you guys fucked us over so many times with these 86 treaties during
Sure.
this one president. And you kicked us off our land. Why should we fight for someone who destroyed our way of life?
Well, and so one, you have this ideology of like rebellion,
Yeah.
and you're like, yes, I also want to rebel. And then you have a promise of quote unquote freedom
Right.
of like being recognized, getting
Right.
funds, like all these things that you were promised can like actually come true. And then you have a workforce that you've kind of assimilated to the American way.
Right.
And like, I don't want to get rid of that.
And like, this is awful. I'm not, I don't want to say this, but like, I'm not defending slavery.
I can't wait for what's about to come.
But like, the use of slaves is awful, but it's been such a way of human life for time immemorial.
Sure. Of that time. Yeah.
Like, ancient Romans had all of their slaves fighting for them. And I think it was just part of like, oh, we captured your people, we're going to use them.
Sure.
Kind of thing. And
Totally.
so I think that was just part of their way of life, and to have that
Right.
being like, that's another part of my way of life that I need to get rid of because of a government that I don't respect is telling me to.
Right.
Fuck off.
Right.
Not great,
Right.
but it's part of the times.
Is there history of, and I don't know if you know this at all, is there history of Native Americans using slaves even before the introduction of the colonization?
I am not sure.
Okay.
I'm going to say yes.
Oh, okay.
But I'm not 100% positive.
Because I think it's the same kind of lens that I think when we were little, we were just like, nobody is bad for this. You know what I mean? And I think we have that lens of Native Americans where we're like, there are people that would never do that. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
like,
so I'm interested
these people
to see.
were suppressed. Why would they suppress other folks?
Right. Well, it was of the times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was my own question.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that is it with the Chickasaw.
Okay.
Now we're going to move on to the Cherokee. And they covered southwestern North Carolina, southeastern Tennessee, southwestern Virginia, edges of western South Carolina, northern Georgia, and northeastern Alabama.
Oh, wow.
Big
That's
area.
That's huge.
They're huge.
Yeah.
And they're the Cherokee are this is like something that happened back in the day, but like most white people would be like, yeah, I got Indian blood in me, I'm part Cherokee. That's like that's the nation, they would call it a tribe then, that most people would claim to have blood of.
Oh, just because they're so large and so well known.
Yeah. Be like, yeah, I got Cherokee blood in me, yeehaw. And it's like, all right,
just like that.
do you?
Like the Jeep Grand Cherokee.
Exactly.
I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I'm surprised they haven't changed the name of yet. But that's
just
a time, a story for a different time.
We'll get into that
later.
later.
All right. So we have the Cherokee, and part of the Cherokee wanted to stay and fight to resist the U.S. government.
Okay.
And avoid being removed from their land. While others thought it would be easier just to accept the money like the Chickasaw did, and whatever else the U.S. had to offer and live another day. Just accept whatever the U.S. is going to give them and get out of there.
Got it.
So in 1835, some members of the Cherokee Nation took it upon themselves to negotiate the Treaty of New Echota.
Okay.
ECHOTA. And this treaty was signed to trade all of the Cherokee land east of the Mississippi, which is about 7 million acres,
Okay.
for only $5 million. With and they would also get relocation assistance and compensation for lost property.
Interesting. Okay.
But the folks that went to negotiate this treaty were self-appointed and didn't actually represent the entire Cherokee Nation.
Okay.
So John Ross, who was a major leader of the Cherokee, protested this whole thing.
Yeah.
And was like, that's fraudulent. It doesn't represent us as a nation at all. And, quote, has not received the sanction of our people, end quote.
Yeah.
And so he and 16,000 other Cherokees signed a petition to nullify the treaty, but Congress was like, nah, we're going to approve the treaty anyway. Fuck off.
Naturally. The crazy thing is when you keep on like talking about leaders within these nations.
Yeah.
You're saying like John Ross, like just very like white, like American names.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like to be legitimized almost like they had to, you know what I mean?
Right.
And we see that even today, but
you talk about the folks out west where it's like, oh, you have Geronimo and Sitting Bull and like
Right.
very more like what you think of as like
Sure.
someone's name, a native name. But these are all the nations that were part of the 5 civilized tribes.
Sure.
So like you said, they assimilated, got their white names,
Right.
so they could hopefully, live their own lives because they're following the rules.
Right.
And so that's why we get names like John Ross.
Right. It's just like,
Yeah, it's stupid.
you're like, but we did everything you wanted us to do. Like we
Right.
assimilated, we did all the things, and
I'm
now
named John now.
Right.
How fucking boring is that?
right. There's no meaning behind John.
No.
Right.
So Congress approved the treaty anyway, and then the treaty was eventually put on Jackson's desk, and he signed it.
Yep.
And then it was enforced by his predecessor, right? The one that comes after his predecessor?
His successor.
His successor.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Predecessor is before.
That's before. So it was signed by President Jackson and enforced by his successor, President Martin Van Buren.
VB.
Yeah, the old VB. So this treaty gave the rights to Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Alabama to have an armed force of 7,000 to relocate about the 13 to 20,000 Cherokees to Cleveland, Tennessee.
Jesus.
Cleveland, Tennessee was their first pit stop.
Okay.
So this was like a 7,000 militia, like volunteer folk.
Got it.
And from there, from Cleveland, Tennessee, the U.S. military then oversaw the further removal of the Cherokee out to Oklahoma.
Okay. So you have a militia starting and then the U.S. military taking over.
Correct.
Okay.
And General Winfield Scott and his troops forced the Cherokee to march out west at bayonet point. Some were locked up in stockades and chains.
Jesus.
And all of this was happening while his men looted the Cherokees' homes and other belongings.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So in the winter of 1838, the Cherokee were forced to march over the 1,200 miles to what they called Indian Territory.
Okay.
So like the Choctaw experienced, many of the rivers and sources of water were frozen because it was winter.
Yeah.
And so there were accounts of people having to like break away the ice just to get water for them to drink and their animals to drink and whatnot.
Yeah.
And because of the horrible conditions, whooping cough, typhus, dysentery, cholera, exposure, and starvation, only a few of those things, were rampant throughout the Cherokee people during the removal. And that's just some of the things that were affecting them.
Yeah.
And during their trek, many towns and settlements had to be avoided. They had to walk around them because of all the diseases going through the Cherokee people, that the towns were like, you can't come here. You'll kill us all.
Yeah.
Also, why would we want you? And that caused the Cherokee to have to walk even further and for longer because they had to avoid the towns instead of going through them.
Oh my God. Like they're just passing through by bayonet. Like calm down.
Right.
Travis.
Travis.
Oh, Jesus.
Over 5,000 Cherokee did not make it to Oklahoma.
Wow. Well, yeah, through all those conditions.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure a majority of them were like, of course, like through conditions and all of those things, and then also just killed by like the military as well.
One of my notes at the end, but I'll say it now here, is that there's a lot more going on, like you just said. There's all these diseases and everything else. And, if you're looking for a good cry, go ahead and read about it yourself. But like, there's a story, not a story, but like there's something that happened related to what's known as Barry's Ferry.
Okay.
And it is this moment for the Cherokee where they're looking to cross a river, and the only way across is this man Barry and his ferry.
Mm-hmm.
And Barry's like, yeah, I'll get you guys across that river when I have the time, when I feel like it. Let
Okay.
me do some other stuff. I'll get you there eventually. And he doesn't for quite some time, like weeks, months. The Cherokee are left waiting. They have to wait under this bluff
Okay.
because they're not allowed in the town. And so they have to hunker down under this rock, essentially. And they wait there for these months long time. Winter is happening. They don't have any supplies.
Yeah.
Disease is running rampant through their camp. And so people are dying there. White settlers are just coming in, killing them for fun. They're just taking them away to kill them.
Jesus.
And Barry, another thing that he also did was instead of charging them the 33 cents a head that he was supposed to, like he did for everybody else, he was charging the Cherokee $1 a head to travel to cross the river.
My God.
And so the Cherokee wound up trying to sue the U.S. government for this delay, for negating any aid that they were supposed to get, and for also every head that of the Cherokee that had died. So for every Cherokee that died waiting to cross this river, they were suing the U.S. government. I think it was like $33 a person, which is like a lot of money nowadays. I'm not too sure, but it was still like trying to get back some damages, so to say.
Yeah.
So that's just one of the things that I wasn't planning on talking about.
Right.
And then I was going to say like, hey, look up this story if you want.
Right.
But yeah, that's Barry's Ferry. And that's just one of the many things that also happened.
Right. Of course.
And one of my final notes here is that a volunteer soldier from Georgia who witnessed and was part of the removal process recounted what he saw, saying, quote, I fought through the Civil War and have seen men shot to pieces and slaughtered by thousands. But the Cherokee removal was the cruelest work I ever knew. End quote.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's no happy ending to this.
No, because even when they land in their territory, they then later down the road get pushed out even further, right? Or like kind of separated and all these
separated.
things.
The land is shrunk to nothing.
Right.
And like, yeah, there's commemorative ceremonies, the trails that these folk took, because it all just wasn't one road. It was several trails that they took to get out west, or were forced to take west, are now national historic trails that you can walk, drive, bike on, whatever. Like, that's great. But okay.
Well,
there's nothing.
Well, there was a skit or a TikTok or something. I think it was like a skit where, you know, in a lot of theaters now, they'll be like, and we just wanted to say that this land used to be the land of this nation. All of those things. Yeah. And so the skit is someone's standing up on the stage saying like, we just want to acknowledge that this land used to be the land of, and so there's a woman in the audience like, oh my God, do we need to get out? This is someone else's. Should we be here? Like, this is someone else's land. And they're like, oh, no. We just, they're like, yeah, but you said this belonged to someone else. Right. And like, you know, goes through that pattern of like, why even say it? You know, like, yes, say it, like, of course. But like, if you're not going to do anything, all you're going to say is, we acknowledge. That's for your own guilt. Yeah. Like, more so than it is like for other people. You know what I mean?
So the Chicago Blackhawks, they, at their the United Center downtown, they at the beginning of each of their games have like on the big video screens, they have a nice video presentation of some native folk like in full regalia and like dancing in a powwow. I believe it's been a minute since I've seen the video.
Okay.
But like the announcer, like the video goes like, oh, we recognize that we are on the land of blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And like, it's a nice presentation and I respect it because like I respect it because like they're acknowledging it.
Sure.
They don't have a terrible name for the team like the Redskins.
Sure.
Or just the Cleveland Indians and have like a terrible depiction of a satirical depiction of a native person.
Right.
And like, I know some Native folk don't agree with that, and like that's obviously fine. Where they're like, oh no, the Black Hawks need to like change their logo, change their thing, and
Sure.
like the mascot isn't someone dancing around in regalia either, like
Right.
the Fighting Illini back in the day, which I think they're just called Illinois. U of I.
No, they're the Illini.
They're still the Illini?
They used to be the Chiefs.
Okay,
Yeah.
there we go.
Mhm.
The Blackhawks mascot is just like this big black bird.
Yeah.
And so like it's done well.
Sure.
And like the logo isn't super offensive blatantly.
Sure.
I don't know.
But
It's interesting.
I think it's one of those, and it, you know, going back to like even that video, she's like, oh, so like a portion of the tickets goes towards this nation. I'm like, oh, well, no. She's like, oh, well, then like concession money. It's like, well, no, it goes to the theater. And like, that's where I'm just like, if you're not, I appreciate the acknowledgement, but if you're not going to make some sort of impact beyond that, you're doing it for yourself.
And I don't know if the Blackhawks do that. That's something I'll have to look into.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if they actually do contribute.
Yeah,
because they're a large enough brand where they could have
massive.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, first, thank you for taking us through that. Like,
of course. Sorry,
horrifying.
everybody.
Yeah, like truly horrifying. But I think it's good for us to understand. I think we think of Trail of Tears. I think a lot of people also like loop that into like an Oregon Trail sort of situation, and it's like there's so much more involved, and so like thousands of, you know, First Nation people like completely destroyed and, you know, relocated and all of those things. And I wouldn't even call it relocated, you know what I mean? You're just kind of like forced out of your home. It's
a removal,
right?
It's in the name of the act, Indian Removal Act, like, fuck.
I mean, right. The context of that is already so horrifying.
Right. It's not replacement. It's not like a resettlement or whatever. It's we're removing you.
Right.
Removing a stain. Like, the fuck.
Well, and I think it's great. I think it's not great. I think it's good for us to continue to have these conversations because we even see that today, like land disputes and all of these things to just get more territory and more land and expand countries. And it's just like, you don't think that in 2023 we would have to deal with things like that, but it's a good reminder to say that this is something that's been ingrained in time, and like we have to remember those things in order to move forward from them.
Definitely. Yeah, and that's part of why I brought it up, why I wanted to talk about it. Especially, I know like we should be talking about it all the time, but November in particular is Native American Heritage Month, and I think having this part of Native American history out there talked about is important, especially with the current climate of the world.
Yeah, legitimately. So. But yeah, so thank you for taking us through that.
Yeah.
I know it was
hard
to do that. Yeah, no, I mean, don't apologize. Like,
yeah. I mean, usually we can't apologize for that.
Right. What do you call it? No, I appreciate you taking us through that horrifying event in history.
Hey, anytime.
And it's going to be all of your topics moving forward. Just super horrifying events. Yeah, that's great.
So make sure to follow us on all of our... I don't know how to jump into this. I don't know if I really even want to. You know what to do, everybody. Let's just end on this note. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
Thanks for hearing me out and listening to this horrible part of our history. Yeah. And we'll see you next time, folks.
Yeah. And if anybody, what I will say is, if anybody has any like personal stories connected to you know different nations and different leaders and things like that, we'd love to hear more about those. I think that would be fantastic to, you know, expand on what we've thrown out today. So.
Yeah, we'd love to highlight that.
Yeah. All right.
On our channels.
Thanks, Dev.
Thanks, Dev.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.